Turkey, turkey, gobble, gobble.
Jonathan, this is after Thanksgiving anyway.
No, I'm just messing with you. Okay, welcome back to another episode of Weekly Tangent, the show that only exists really so that I could torture you in a different way every single week, Dylan.
Yeah, but I'm the one who asked you to come here, so I guess I'm just a masochist.
Yeah, well, don't worry. I'm going to keep up with my trend of switching up how I torture you. So this week's going to be a little different, kind of unlike anything we've done before, which is most of my episodes, it seems like. Which maybe I should stick with the topic. Whatever. Anyways, as my semester's been wrapping up, I've had to do a lot of different research for various things, and found some of it interesting. Going to kind of present it to you today in an entertaining format.
Are you sure it's entertaining?
No, but I found it interesting.
Okay.
So maybe interesting might be more accurate than entertaining. We'll see.
All right.
What the kind of thing that I had to research, I'll give you kind of the topic and then I'm going to actually present it. The topic is we had to find an example of when the insanity plea was successfully used, such that the person was declared not guilty by reasons of insanity.
Okay.
So we're kind of going to go a little bit down a true crime rabbit hole, which is probably just a one-off thing for this podcast because I don't want to go down that road.
Fair
But
enough.
it's fun for a one-off thing. So are you ready to get freaky on this Sunday?
I guess I'm as ready as I'm gonna be.
All right, I'm gonna read for a couple minutes, and then
You're gonna read for a couple minutes? Is this just gonna be a reading podcast?
No. Like I planned a script to like lay out the foundation for you because I can't like be like this fact, that fact, because you'd be like, what do I do with all this?
Oh, okay. I guess. Yeah.
Okay, let me put on my narrator voice while I'm deathly ill. Okay, let's set the scene. It's November 22nd, 2004. As a police officer, you're no stranger to distressing scenes, but the one you see tonight, however, might just top them all. A 911 operator takes a call from a daycare center. The caller worried about their friend and former coworker Dina. Dina, you see, is no stranger to the police force. Law enforcement and CPS have had to get involved with her and her family in the past due to her history of suicide attempts and psychotic episodes. But today was different. Today, when you arrive at the scene, you see a scene that you'll never forget. Upon entering the house, you see Dina with a knife in her hand, covered in blood and listening to Christian hymns. Though her own shoulder has evidently been sliced with that same knife, she's not the biggest victim that night. The biggest victim is her 10-month-old daughter, Margaret, whom she cut the arms off of and left to bleed out. How did we get here? How does anyone get to the point where they feel compelled to do this sort of thing? Well, the answer to that is actually pretty complicated, I'm not going to lie, but I'm going to try and summarize the key points for you and, feel free to ask questions afterwards or, along the way. And, I'll go off the knowledge off the top of my head, unscripted.
Okay.
All right. And as a disclaimer, I'm not saying I'm an expert and I know why it happened. I'm just laying out a lot of the factors that surely seem to contribute to it.
All right.
All right. With that out of the way, we're going to go way, way back, starting with her childhood. As a child, Dina suffered from hydrocephalus, which is a condition marked by a significant buildup of cerebrospinal fluid deep within the brain. Hence its nickname, water on the brain disorder.
Okay.
Hydrocephalus can cause significant behavioral and cognitive changes, as well as numerous physical symptoms, as I'm sure you could imagine. So her condition was so severe that it necessitated 4 surgeries, all within her young childhood years through high school. And along with those surgeries, as I'm sure you can imagine, came a lot of ridicule because of the physical symptoms that would manifest. Not to include just shaving her head because of it, but also the head literally swells to an excessively large size, disproportionate. You know how babies normally have huge heads compared to the rest of their body.
Yeah.
Kind of imagine that, but you're not a baby.
I can imagine it because I think it's something a little bit similar happens when people get hair transplants.
Yeah, so you could kind of get the idea of what I'm saying here, but this is a pervasive thing that happened throughout her childhood, unfortunately. And, kind of the ridicule and bullying was something that reportedly stayed with her, for the rest of her life. But, bullying isn't the kind of thing that pushes someone to cut the arms off of their child.
I mean, it could be. You don't know how severe that bullying was.
That's true. But I think I'm going to dig a little bit deeper and, kind of go on a little bit. So with all that kind of like bullying and ridicule and everything, she would lean on her parents, for support, understandably, right?
Mm-hmm.
But unfortunately, that wouldn't really last forever. It actually wouldn't last for all that long at all, because when she'd reached adulthood, her mother had developed Parkinson's, and it kind of left her without her biggest sense of support, because Parkinson's being a severe neurodegenerative disorder, she actually had to take care of her mother, and it'll actually become a plot point later on that's quite interesting. But without her mother, you might say, like, well, what about her other like support network, right? Like, what about her husband, the father of her children? What about her friends? What about coworkers? That kind of thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, actually, unfortunately, largely they did more harm than good. I'm gonna
How
start with
so?
yeah, I'm gonna start with the husband in church, because sometimes having no support network is better than having a bad support network.
I guess, yeah.
Yeah, the husband believed in traditional family roles, so he preferred that Dina would stay at home and be a stay at home mother, take care of the children. So, right off the bat, already cut Dina off from having coworkers to support her. And, he also heavily reinforced stereotypical gender roles, and that the wife needs to be completely submissive, which is something he got from church, something that's going to come up later.
Mm-hmm.
But other things he did was he wouldn't get her medication for her. And Dina was diagnosed with postpartum depression and postpartum psychosis, meaning, she would frequently have complete lapses with reality, wouldn't be able to know what's actually happening there, which would cause her to like wander down the street late at night screaming, running. She'd been mentally hospitalized before, so like this was pretty fucked up to deprive her of that, right?
Yeah, not some fun stuff.
Yeah. But he would discourage the use of medication. He would discourage her from getting help, because don't worry, God will take care of them.
Oh, was he Christian then, or isn't there like Seventh Day Adventists or something that are like, we don't need medicine?
I'm not 100% clear on what it is, because this church, oh boy, let me tell you, this is where I think a lot of the issue came in. So this is what I'm going to get on to next here, because I think that's actually the most fascinating part of the story. Dina and her husband were extremely religious, but their faith got warped into something honestly just completely beyond normal faith when they came across the Water of Life Church. That
Oh,
church.
but it all comes full circle. The water of life. And what has she had in her head since birth? Too much water.
Dang, you figured it out. Yeah, yeah, the church was behind it all, actually.
I knew.
They got her as a baby implant. No, just kidding. The church was led by Doyle Davidson, who, like, this guy, let me tell you, when I was just doing the research for the class, not even for the podcast, I was just so interested in reading about this guy. I looked up recordings of his past, like, sermons and lectures, and it is unlike anything I've seen before, like, not exaggerating. And I've been to like multiple churches of various varieties growing up, and like it's just fucking weird. And
From
I'm
what
gonna
it sounds like so far, and what it sounds like you're alluding to, it sounds less like a stereotypical Christian church, and it sounds more of like a cult.
Oh, it absolutely is. Like, if this was a work of fiction, I would compare it to Silent Hill, and that's not the worst comparison, to be honest.
Well, I mean, when the story starts off with a baby getting its arms chopped off, I think that's a fair comparison.
Yeah. So, like, I listened to both recent recordings and ones from around the time when the child was murdered.
Hmm.
And the guy is like, even back then, he was barely like coherent, intelligible. Like, I'm not sure if his mental capacity wasn't there, or if he was just hard of speaking. But like, I put on headphones, tried to turn the volume high, turn speed slower, faster, put on captions. I tried to do whatever I could to understand him, and I could not do it, dude.
Yeah.
Like, this guy made no sense, but his followers were very devout, and apparently somehow they understood his ramblings to take his teachings to heart. But beyond this, like, the little bits I could make out were like weird chanting to musical beats, in which the women would go running down the pews and dancing in circles and everything for like 30 minutes or longer. And it was kind of off-putting. I'm gonna send you a link to it later, like afterwards, just for your own knowledge, and so you get the horror of it yourself.
Yeah.
But no, this was some of the most like the message he spewed was the most conservative religious shit like imaginable. Like he would preach about Jezebel spirits who would take over the women in the congregation, and to like get rid of these Jezebel spirits, the women would need to completely submit to their husbands and their will entirely.
Oh my god.
And he talked about how God had willed it such that one of the women in the congregation would become his wife, even though he already had a wife and she already had a husband. And this caused a little bit of contention in the church, but you see, no one questions the great Doyle. So like the woman just had to put up with it, like stay in the church sermons while he would say that she was destined to marry him.
Real
And
quick, do you know where this took place? Like what state?
I believe it's Dallas in the city of Plano or something. Let me double check really quickly. Dina Schlosser. Let's see. Yeah, in Plano, Texas.
Okay, okay.
And
Yeah, I just had some places in my mind, and that makes sense. That being one of the places, yeah.
yeah, and a lot of the sources I got this from were from local Texas newspapers. I tried to get it from as big sources as I could, like Washington Post or whatever, but a lot of it was more local journalism,
Hmm.
which is better in some ways and worse in some ways because local investigative journalism definitely was a real thing. Nowadays, maybe not as prevalent, but back when this happened in 2004, yeah, it had its legitimate purposes, so I'm willing to believe it because when I looked up these various newspapers, I didn't see anything calling them out for being untrustworthy.
Okay.
But yeah, so Plano, Texas, and all this was happening. But everything I've said is gonna get like even worse. Like everything I've said is only scratching the surface. More relevant to the case of mental illness and pushing people over the edge, he was quoted as saying, "I do not believe that any mental illness exists other than demons, and no medication can straighten it out other than the power of God." So you could see why someone with no support network, a husband who cuts her off from the world and her medications, and who's already struggling with postpartum depression and psychosis, and has a history of suicide attempts and psychotic breaks. Yeah, I think you could see why this is a recipe for disaster, right?
My real question is, how do you differentiate the postpartum from what is just clearly having a terrible life in general?
Well, that's actually kind of interesting because like there's a case of nature versus nurture, and we don't really I don't honestly expect that the hydrocephalus that she had growing up had that much of an effect on her later on, though I'm no expert. I can't say for 100% certain.
Hmm.
But it really just seems like environmentally, she was just fucked over in life. Like
Yes,
she was,
very much so.
yeah. So honestly, like it almost seems like a perfect disaster for this kind of thing to happen, to be honest.
Yeah.
And it kind of just built up one day to the big tragedy when she saw a news story about a lion that killed a young boy. And in her mental state, she saw this as a sign of the apocalypse and a sign from God to kill her infant daughter to stop it. So that's exactly what she did. She cut the arms off her 10-month-old baby and left it to bleed out until cops came and well, she was arrested and after court proceedings, she was found to be not guilty by reason of insanity.
Okay, I
But
am curious with a situation like that, because I don't know any of the laws and rules about that.
mhm.
So I'm assuming even if you get out of like going to jail or prison from reason of insanity, I assume you don't just walk home. It's like, okay, I'm legally insane. I can just do whatever the fuck I want now. So do
Yeah.
you go to like a mental ward? Do you go to like something, just to work on that stuff? Do you have like a caretaker that's assigned to you so you don't murder any more babies? Like, what do you do?
So I did a bit of research into this, and there's kind of two processes here, at the very least, is that if you're reason of insanity at the time that you're at trial, you have to be treated such that you're competent and aware enough of your surroundings and the charges against you, such that you can stand trial. So that's one phase right there. But beyond that, there's also going to be reason of insanity such that if you're declared not guilty, you're still under the jurisdiction of the court, so, for the length of the sentence that you'd be given otherwise.
Hmm.
So you're still in their jurisdiction, and so you're going to be sent to a mental facility such that you can get the treatment you need. And then from there, you're held there as long as necessary, and then you'll be set in the prison otherwise once you're stable enough, and you'll generally continue your regimen there.
Well, I also feel
Is
like that's a curse in a way, because let's say I know that this isn't how mental health works. It's not something like it's a cut that heals. But let's
yeah.
say that somehow her mental stuff, she gets in a good position, divorces the husband, goes away from the cult and all of that stuff, and she becomes completely quote unquote sane. Then I'm sure looking back on what she did to her child would drive her insane all over again.
Oh, that's actually a thing. Yeah, I was doing research on it because it's kind of interesting. Like, I wasn't even going to include this in the script, but the place where she was eventually imprisoned, one of her prison mates is actually someone who was in an even more famous case, Andrea Yates, who drowned her 5 children and was also declared not guilty by reason of insanity after appeal, but still being that was the situation. And apparently the two like became a huge like source of support for one another because how how do you find support for this kind of thing? That's obviously going to outrage most people. No one's going to be able to relate to it. So it was just kind of interesting because this is something hard for them to cope with. So the only people they could confide in is someone in that same situation. And yeah, it was weighing heavily on their mind. If I'm not mistaken, Andrea Yates, because this isn't included in the script, so I'm going to have to fact check it later.
Hmm.
But from what I understand, yeah, just right here on people.com, and I'll see if I can find a more reasonable source, but she voluntarily declines to stay in the mental hospital because she just is racked with so much guilt. She doesn't want to leave. She feels safest and best in there for her and those around her. So that this is a very real thing that happens. That's a great observation by you.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I am kind of a genius.
It's just unfortunate. Like I it's hard to think of someone as not guilty for, in the case of Dina Schlosser, cutting the arms off her child and letting it bleed out, but in the case of Andrea Yates, drowning 5 children. But on the other hand, like at least in the case of Dina Schlosser, I can kind of understand the ruling because it's clear that her mental state was very fragile. She has a history of being mentally hospitalized. She had a notoriously, famously unsupportive group of people around her. Like, I'm no expert, but it kind of seems like the framework is there for that kind of ruling.
I am curious with you looking up like different situations where people did get out on the insanity clause, because that's two right there that where they murdered their own children. And I'm wondering, do you think part of the reason why it works in those situations, despite the fact that they clearly have those issues, is because it's things that are like primarily like self-inflicted, where obviously the children suffered more than anyone else, but it was their children within their weird community, where like if God told this woman to go out and murder like some other kid that was just at CVS or something, do you think that she would have been able to get out on the same thing? Because then she'll have people who are fighting against her because their kid was murdered, as opposed to it being her kid who was murdered.
Right, and I think that's an interesting question, especially taking into account things like the Aurora shooting. The guy who shot at the theater during The Dark Knight Rises.
Yeah.
And obviously I believe he is actually declared guilty and not innocent by reason of insanity. I would have to fact check that later as well. But I think the thing that really contributes to these not guilty verdicts is in the case of Dina, at least because I'm more familiar with that, she has such a long history of mental illness and of being mentally hospitalized. And she also has a history of being a loving mother because this wasn't her only child. Actually, she has 2 other children, if I'm not mistaken. So she had been a perfectly not normal, loving mother given her history, but nothing pointed to signs of this because, as an example, CPS had been involved in the past, but after, some time evaluating her, they declared her not a threat to the children, so they left. And, that might be considered a mistake in retrospect, but based off their guidelines, she was a perfectly normal mother. Like she was loving. So this kind of thing is just extremely out of character. She's not some sick, demented, twisted thing in their eyes, at least. Otherwise,
Yeah.
obviously, the children would have been taken away. So I think just the history of mental illness and the history of being, normal, loving behavior. Because even in the case of Andrea Yates, she had 5 children. So evidently, all those years, she was probably a relatively adequate mother until then.
I guess, yeah.
So I could definitely see that being a contributing factor. There's also probably other things that I'm not aware of, but those are the two that I think make the most sense.
Yep, makes sense to me.
Yeah. So now that we kind of talked about the ruling a bit, I'm going to fast forward a few years, also partially just because my throat is dying. But in 2012, it was actually revealed that Dina was working at a local Walmart, meaning she wasn't in inpatient care anymore. She'd been released and was on outpatient care. And she was kind of hoping to start over. She changed her name, got a job. She wasn't having contact with her previous family. She was just trying to reinvent herself the best she could to make up whatever she could with her life, having some kind of normal life with normalcy and stability.
Yeah.
But yeah, but given the high profile nature of the case, it'd be like Casey Anthony trying to go out on the street and, it's just like that's not going to happen. People are going to recognize you, and that's exactly what happened. People noticed it. They went online, made an uproar about it, and Walmart became aware of that because she was declared not guilty. It didn't come up on a background check, considering she had a different name as well. So they weren't aware, according to them, that they were employing her. So they subsequently fired her, right? Which, on the one hand, I totally get it because, like, yeah, that's probably not the person you want representing your company and the people are going to be seeing when they walk in your store. But on the other hand, like, damn, what are you supposed to do in that situation if you're trying to restart your life, have some kind of structure and everything, Like, I don't know what the solution there is.
Well, yeah, I also just find it interesting from the standpoint of you look at like a serial killer or someone like that, and their information gets, not leaked to the public, just shown to the public. It makes sense. But this is something where like the only people involved would have been like her husband and her direct family.
Yeah,
So with there being like no need to show anyone else, and from the sounds of it, this woman on the first try got the insanity plea to go through, as opposed to it
yeah,
being something that they had to go back in after it was rejected a first time. If that's the case, if it was never like just publicly stated that she, wasn't insane and all of that stuff, then I find it kind of ridiculous that the media reported on her identity at all, because that's just like such a clear issue to come later in life, assuming that she gets better like she did. That, like,
right?
okay, well, in 20 years, especially if she doesn't feel safe moving too far out from that stuff, will be like, oh, yeah, someone's going to recognize the fact that, hey, isn't that insane woman who murdered her child?
Yeah, I thought that was kind of fucked up, to be honest. I was like, damn, obviously she did something like horribly unspeakably evil, but she was clearly mentally ill. How is she ever supposed to process her trauma and move on with life? Like, I I don't know. Obviously she did something that can never be undone, but also she did time in prison and she got treatment for a mental disorder. Like,
Wait, so she did do time in prison despite the insanity plea?
yes, because you still remain under the jurisdiction of the court for that time, so it's up to them if you'll be like released or not, from what I understand.
Okay.
So with that said, obviously they did let her out at some point, right? And she may have been in prison while she was receiving treatment. I'm not entirely clear on that. I was trying to read through the sources, and that wasn't exactly super elaborated upon.
Hmm.
So blame my sources on that one because I was researching this for a few hours. But point being, as you might have gathered, she was released at a point and she was trying to live a normal life. But unfortunately, not all stories end the way you would like. And, as bad as one might feel about her attempts to restart her life being foiled by other people after having received such extensive treatment, that, sometimes treatment isn't super effective. Since, she remained in the inpatient setting, excuse me, since, she was out in the outpatient setting, there we go, she has since been readmitted because she had had numerous relapses, particularly psychotic episodes where she would like go out in the streets screaming and singing Christian hymns. So it's clearly based in religious delusions. And so ever since then, she's been readmitted and she's stayed in mental facilities since then.
Okay, that makes sense. So I guess that doesn't change the issue too much. I am curious. You brought up the like psychopathic cult leader earlier. Did he, since this was apparently a very publicized case,
Yeah.
did he ever comment on anything about that? Like, oh, she did good. That if it was a sign from God, because it's one of those things where like, hey, if you can't disprove it, then it might as well be true. As a lot of cults go. So it's like, hey, for all he knows, she did stop the apocalypse by doing that to her child.
Well, it's actually kind of aggravating, like infuriating in my mind, because like nothing happened to the guy. Like if you go on his church's YouTube channel, he like, or not, yeah, not his YouTube channel, but his actual website. Excuse me. He still is doing sermons to this day, like literally as recently as this last week.
Oh my
Like
god.
he's still a very not prominent presence because he did get taken off of airwaves after that largely. But as far as comments on this, he's remained aloof. He tries to say that the family wasn't that involved. He didn't really know them, even though the family has stated, that they have met him, talked to him personally. In fact, he placed his hands on the mother with Parkinson's and cast the devil out of her so that she'd be healed.
Oh my god.
That didn't work. But also, he denies, having ever set hands on her, but he does say he prayed for her. But all of that aside, no, he's remained at arm's length. He'll say that mental illness is the source of the devil, and he fully supports condemning devils in order to solve that kind of thing, and mental illness is a sin. But in the case that you're not willing to do that, that doesn't help. You should receive, treatment. So it's like, bro, pick your lane. You can't sit on both sides of that fence there. Either you support getting mental health treatment or you don't. Like, you can't play both sides on that one.
I don't know. I mean, it could be like I remember in one of the politics classes that I had to take. I forgot if you go on the fence first or if you go on or go on the fence second. But I know that you at some point want to sit on the fence because you either already have enough people or you're waiting to like get more people. Like if you sit on the fence, it's like okay, well now there's only two options, so it's like let's go with who gets the most like general views because that gets the most people.
Yeah, it's so infuriating. Honestly, like I think the pastor is borderline the most fascinating part of the case because I read a whole entire thing from the Dallas Observer. It was amazingly long, but they really looked into his past, his history and everything, and the guy is like obviously a religious zealot, but he's also like obsessive. Like he wrote so many letters to that woman who claimed like he would be his wife and everything. Like he stalked her, he slandered her and everything to the point where she had to entirely leave the church and move and everything. And she tried to like remain completely out of the public eye because it just like effectively ruined her life and social circle, and he refuses to take any of the blame for that because God willed it. And I'm like, this guy is such a piece of shit, but nothing happened to him.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I've seen so many like movies with similar premises as this, and it's always just interesting. Of you see something crazy like that in a movie, and you're like, oh, well, this is just a character. But to realize that there are real like psychopaths like that in real life is always just sad.
Yeah, and to realize, like, obviously, the whole entire point of a cult is that you're going to take advantage of vulnerable people such that they are trapped in it with you. But to take advantage of someone in this fragile of a mental state, that is absolutely despicable. Like, he directly contributed to this, in my opinion. So it's just like, it's infuriating to know that people like that are walking around and still getting money from other vulnerable people supporting him and
Yeah,
probably ruining their lives too, for that matter.
well, I know that it's not exactly one to one, but you also live in like isn't the head of or like the capital of Scientology in Center City?
Yeah, one of the major centers, if not literally the headquarters, is right next to where I live. Like I've driven past it multiple times.
Yeah, and haven't you said that there's like if you drive by it, there's like guards with assault rifles on the inside or something?
Um, I don't remember if the assault rifle thing happened. That was other people telling me that. But I have driven by it, and there are 100% guards like around there 24/7. I have seen that because I've driven by it late at night, which might be questionable decision making on my end. But I've driven past it late at night, and there's guards staffing it 24/7, and I'm like, no one gets in and no one gets out apparently.
Yeah.
But like, I don't know, Scientology is a whole different thing in and of itself. Like that is organized cult religion, and that is horrifying. This is a small scale thing, which different dynamics, and it's still like terribly bad. But I don't know how something on the scale of Scientology lasts. Like, it feels like it's well known. There's been documentaries put out about the atrocities that they've done, but it's just
Well,
like,
I think that's pretty easy. It's with how fucking expensive it is to get into Scientology, they clearly have the money for it.
yeah, I'm just saying, like, it feels like it's been put out there, but nothing happens legally, so I guess maybe it can't be proved.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I also know that there's like different things with religion as far as like obviously you can't murder if your religion tells you to do, but religion allows things to toe the line a bit more. I mean, it's like churches don't pay taxes like property taxes, right?
Yeah, they don't.
Yeah, so I don't know. Certain things could be like that. Certain things they could just have like friends enough in high places. I mean, I even remember seeing a video about Scientology of like how much it actually takes to get into Scientology, like if you want to get to a core member level, and between all of the tests that you have to take for your thetan levels and that shit and just different things that you have to sign up for, I think like part of the reason why it's stereotyped as a rich person's cult is because I think they said it took like $100,000 if you actually want to have done everything to get up to
Jesus.
that core member level.
Imagine having 100,000 or more and fucking throwing it at that.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'm sure that part of that attracts people is just the exclusivity of it. Of like, it's a religion where I can be a main character if I have the money for it.
Yeah, that's fair. Like, whether we like it or not, we are social creatures and we all need to find belonging. And that's kind of how these cults work and operate. They provide some kind of community for people who can't find it otherwise. It's just unfortunate the ramifications of that.
Yeah,
Like, I, I don't know. We are talking about legality and implications and everything. I guess legally, there probably is nothing that can be charged against you for saying, yeah, don't seek out treatment. Like, it's just a devil inside you. Like, it's up to that person. It's their own consent. It's just, it's unfortunate how it turned out in this case. Obviously, the loss of life of an infant daughter and the ruining of a family and everything.
yeah. It's unfortunate, and religion and just different things can be a little bit fucky sometimes.
Honestly, now I kind of want to do an episode on that and look into it, but that's going to take a whole nother mountain of planning. So I'm going to end this story here, but I kind of do want to do a little more follow up a little bit
Okay.
and say, I don't want to say this was true crime because that wasn't the intention. I wasn't trying to get into that genre. I just think it might have overlaps. I was just doing research for my class that happened to be in this area. So I just want to ask, like, what do you think of the true crime genre in general? Like, I've never interacted with it, but I want to hear your thoughts and then I'll share mine.
I enjoy it overall. I think that it's something where I've probably seen it most at my dad's house, where they'll have like different TV shows that play of where they recreated of like blah blah blah, this person came home and they found this, police reports this. They have true crime shows. I mean, that's a whole genre. And I don't know. I feel like it's similar to it's like the long form version of TikTok in my mind of the way that like you get so little substance out of it at the end of the day, but it's also just mindlessly entertaining of just like what happens in this mystery. So it's just, I mean, there's podcasts on it. I know that like there's the two guys from BuzzFeed who did like unsolved crimes and stuff like that, and
Right.
I find it an interesting genre, but it's also one of those that like unless you get super into it of like I'm going to become a crime psychologist, forensic, whatever, investigator and stuff like that, it really ends up always breaking down to like this is unsolved, well I'm not going to do anything to solve it. Oh, this is what happened, that's interesting, well I'm not going to drive to the county jail and go talk to this person because one, that's a lot of work, and two, plenty of people have already done that and reported it online. So I find it interesting, but in my opinion it's almost just as interesting as like watching or reading non-true crime things, just as long as it's like a crime that's interesting, true or not. It's just content.
Yeah, honestly, that's fair. Like, I guess kind of like I'm gonna like broach into the next question. It's like just my own answer first. Is like what I think it is that draws people into true crime. Like, I think it's actually multifaceted. Like some people, I'm sure, do enjoy the mystery. Like they want to find out what happened, or maybe like come up with their own theories and everything. Also, from another angle, like I feel like a lot of people like it from the psychological aspect, like what pushes a person to do such an atrocity, for example. Like here, like I didn't go as extensive as I would have liked, partially because I just got super sick over the weekend. But I feel like there's compelling enough reasons here. You could draw safe enough conclusions that I don't think anything's too romanticized or dramatized here. I think it's relatively grounded, but there, like, this has a huge audience. People love true crime. There's got to be something bringing them in. Do you think it is just that mystery? Do you think it's the psychology aspect? What do you think it is?
I think that's part of it. I think it's also something that's been shown in like politics and different hate watching things, or why people, leave comments on stuff they hate on like Reddit or YouTube and that stuff. Is people like to feel things, even if it's not necessarily positive emotions. People will intentionally, like, I will go into YouTube comment sections, even though I never find anything interesting, and I'm almost just searching for like, if someone says, "Oh, this is a great video," and then it has 400 comments on it, and it's like, okay, I know that somewhere it's going to start an argument of like, this isn't great, this person's so much better, oh yeah, well, this person's an asshole, blah blah blah, and people just love to feel that like adrenaline that you get from that stuff. So I'm sure
Yeah,
that part of it is the mystery is interesting, but I'm sure all of part of it is also like, oh, I can't believe that bitch actually got away with that thing, and she killed her child. It's like, oh, I hate it. Now I feel like I should go do this, even though I'm just eating Tostitos on my couch and not actually going to do anything. And
so
people just like to feel things.
yeah, so it's like kind of the conflict and the rabbit hole they go down with it.
Yeah.
That's fair. Like, this was an absolute rabbit hole for me because the like thing I had to do is just for a discussion board post for my class. It only had to be like, I think, 500 words, which is like barely one page.
Yeah.
But I spent probably like 4 or 5 hours researching it because I was just so fascinated. I was like trying to get all the context I could. Like, I'm not into the true crime genre generally, but I absolutely see what sucks people in after this, at least doing the research.
No, it doesn't
Maybe,
surprise me too much because I remember I took tech theater for 3 years in high school, and always like our end of semester assignments were go see a play and write a review on it. And in English classes, if we had to write like a 3-page paper, I'd be like, fuck, man, I don't want to write this. But if I had to write a 2-page paper minimum on some play that I just watched and was really enjoying, then I'd have such a easier time doing it because I'd be like, oh, this person, this, blah, blah, blah. So if you only have to write 500 words and you have, 35 minutes worth of YouTube content to talk about, and that's the abridged version anyway, because you're not feeling well, like, it makes sense that you can easily go over that 500 word minimum.
I honestly like find that so interesting too, because it's like some stuff is such a drag. Like, you could not push me hard enough to do this thing for a given class, but otherwise it's just like I'm so damn passionate about other things. Like, I don't know. I read my stuff about psychology in class and kind of set it down and forget about it afterwards. But like, if you get me on the internet researching things, I actually like generally like research stuff for hours and come up with a pretty good understanding to where when it comes up later in class, I'm like, oh, my research was actually quality. This is what's being taught in class. It's just interesting the stuff you will do on your own initiative versus when it's assigned to you.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'll tell you this. I know that the true crime genre is a very popular thing. So if we ever need to have far more views, I think sure, let's just completely transition into weekly crimes.
Oh God. Well, that's not the intention, like I said at the start. But I actually do have two more questions, really quickly, just for the fun of it.
Okay.
One is, do you ever like keep up with the headlines of high profile cases like this? Like whether it's Casey Anthony or the Aurora shooter, Jeffrey Dahmer, because he's been huge lately in the media, particularly because of Netflix's documentary. Like, do you ever keep up with that kind of thing? Or is it just like, you're vaguely aware about it and you don't really care all that much?
Um, I tend not to go too much into it. I mean, part of it is I don't have cable, so I don't see the stuff as much. So that definitely contributes to it. But I'm generally interested in this stuff. But I've had like those nights in middle school or in high school where something happens, and then you go down a Wikipedia thing of like all of these murderers and psychological terms and this stuff. And I don't know. For me, it always just ends up like I kind of said, leading nowhere. Of like, okay, this was generally generally interesting, but I didn't get too much out of it. It's not like I'm going to discover something that no one else discovered while going in, Wikipedia or some shit. And also,
Yeah.
like you said about understanding things. People are just curious with like how could someone do this, and a lot of it just goes down to it's like trying to teach a blind person, oh, this is what blue is like, and it's just like I can't understand blue because I can't see colors. It's the same thing here of just like, how did this person rationalize this? It's just like their rationalization doesn't really matter to them because in their mind it's just a completely different 1 + 1 = 3 compared to 1 + 1 = 2 to everyone else.
Yeah, that's fair. Like, there's only so much you could do to get in their head. Like, I guess that's kind of the point of like guilty by insanity. Like, despite all the reasons I outlaid, like or outlined, excuse me, like it's not rational what happened. Like, this is someone in a moment of insanity. There's no wrapping your head around it,
Yeah,
no matter how
exactly.
much justifying. But no, I like get you. Like certain like world events like politics, I'll keep informed for the purpose of like voting or just like important about knowing who you associate with and everything based on their stances on stuff. But also, it's just like you said, there's nothing you can do about this. All that reading about the stuff does is, at the end of the day, probably make me depressed or angry that I can't do more about it. Like, I don't know. I guess in the case of Jeffrey Dahmer, because he's huge, like I read up on him and like, yeah, he's a fucking psychopath who murdered people. But can I do anything about it? No. It's just horrible knowing how many families were absolutely ruined because of his actions.
Yeah, I mean that's part of why I said I tend to like more just fiction works, whether it be anime or whatever, in this genre. Because with that, if someone's like an absolute psychopath, insane or whatever, someone who like crafts really amazing, horrible scenarios, you can appreciate the writing. Where when it happens in reality, you don't appreciate like, wow, I just find it so amazing that this person did all of these horrible things. I love it. I can't wait until their sequel. It's like, no, I find it amazing that they're a psychopath, and I really don't want that to happen.
Well, yeah, like I feel like people talk about desensitization in media and whatever, but like I could see murder in a video game and be perfectly cool with it. But like I see people like on Reddit threads, like I don't think I think it got banned, but there was a sub called like "Watch People Fucking Die," but it
Oh
was
yeah.
literally watching people die in real life.
Okay,
Like
so
I
that
didn't
sounds like half of Reddit 50/50 or 4chan 50/50, whatever
more or
it is.
less, and like even 50-50, I'll incorporate that too. Like I don't go on those subs because like I don't want to be desensitized to actual murder and stuff. Like that stuff is horrifying. I don't want to see it. Like that's actually different. You could show me the most gruesome like saw shit, and I could watch it and eat popcorn at the same time. That's fine. But like if anything close to that happened in real life, no, I never want to be desensitized to that.
Yeah, it is ridiculous.
But yeah, so I guess the only other thing that I'll ask is I don't know if this was a jury case or not. I only saw the ruling and I didn't actually research that because I didn't think it was too relevant. But how do you think you would handle like being a juror in a case like this? Like, is this the kind of thing you want to fucking duck out of, or is it kind of like, I gotta do jury duty anyways? This is a more interesting case, or like, how do you think you feel?
I can tell you, as someone who has gotten jury duty like 3 times and has gotten out of it every time because I was flying to Korea or I moved or something like that, I'd probably try to duck out of it no matter how interesting it is. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, I guess it really depends on what my mood is because either way, you're not getting much out of jury duty. So would I rather go for like the parking ticket route, even though I know that's not what jury duty goes on, but still,
Yeah,
I'm just like, here's something that's super easy to agree on. Where with juries, they have to come to a unanimous decision. So with something like this, if one person's like, no, this woman is crazy but not actually insane, she deserves, prison and blah blah blah, and everyone else is like, oh well, it's the it she can get the insanity excuse or whatever it's called, then it's like, okay, well, it's a hung jury, we have to wait until this shit's done. So like it could be a fun story, but also if you don't have the right people with you, then it could just be a month long thing of just, they're
yeah.
guilty, no they're not, fuck you, fuck you.
Well, I mean, yeah, I've heard like horror stories where like every single person but one juror agrees, and then everyone's just like obviously heartbroken at the end of it because the person doesn't get the full sentence or they get off like innocent or like to some various degree. And like, could you imagine being in the almost unanimous opinion as that one fucking person who won't agree and like the sheer seething rage you would feel? I could not imagine how I would like cope in that situation.
Well,
Or
that's
hell
your
if
homework then, is you have to look up a case where one person disagreed that was in a jury and then they get murdered as a result of that.
Oh God, yeah, that I could picture. But I just kind of asked this because, like, one of my good friends, like one of my closest friends, he was. Hopefully, this isn't illegal to disclose because I don't know how much you can disclose, but I'll keep everything anonymous and whatnot. He was like on a jury for a case where it was a sexual assault case and the case of like incest, like the person's own daughter, right?
Hmm.
And like my friend found that like they were happy to be on the jury because they just wanted the person like fucking guilty, and they were like really passionate about it, and they got to know like the DA and everything on a not personal basis, but on a good professional level and everything. And like it was a rewarding experience for them, and they said they would do it again, like if it was that kind of case. But I just I've never actually been selected for a jury. I've always been either excused for, and my mom's medical situation, the most recent one, but also the one before that, I was voted off because he didn't like that I worked for a congressman before, which is reasonable. You would think I'd lean a certain way after that,
Yeah.
but it's just, I, until I'm on a jury, I guess I can't really know the headspace I'd be in, but I don't know. I don't see it being a rewarding experience for me. I think it would just be very stressful, very upsetting, and yeah.
Yeah.
But that's kind of all the questions I've got. If you got any more, feel free to say any if you got any input or
No,
whatever.
I feel like I interjected with things whenever I did have questions or thoughts that came up with it.
Okay, then I think I'm relatively happy with where we're at. We kind of got to talk about a very horrifying, but it's just something that happened, and we got some good discussion about it. So I'm happy ending it here.
Yeah, yeah, I am fine with that as well. Well, then, till next time, don't murder any babies. Ta for now.
I'm gonna stick with toot toot for Newt on this one. I'm not making a joking ending.